Alright, good evening everybody. So this is episode 2, building off what we talked about in episode 1, and the core question we're trying to answer here is, what is Army Fit? One of the hard parts of the job is often feels like there's a big disconnect between the way that we're measured and assessed, either by the school or by APFTs, and what we actually have to do when we're working. And so I know for me at least, when I first got in, there was a lot of training ADHD, because you're trying to look at what you should do to get fit, and you keep flipping depending on what blog you're reading at the time, or what book you're reading at the time, or who you're training with, between what the answer is. And so in answering this question, I started with, what do I need to be able to do? And so when I generated a list, you got your classic push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, rope climbs, combatives, all kinds of heavy carries, be it carrying a buddy, carrying ammo. But in addition to some of these strength-based things, and these you have to do for your job, these will be assessed. There's also all these cardio outputs. So you have your 2 mile, Ranger School has the 5 mile, everybody has rucking. You're gonna have to be able to swim. You're gonna be able to do land nav as well. And so it feels it, and then on top of this, obviously you're going to have to be able to be strong enough to handle your guys. So you're going to be lifting in a general sense. And so there's all these competing fitness demands, right? And so oftentimes it felt like going after one took away from your ability to do the other. And your options are either play workout whack-a-mole, where you hit some of these for a little while and then you transition to something else, or you have a split personality where you work out for the Army in the morning and then you do what you want in the afternoon. And then you start getting training issues like your weight JRTC, your weight all these training events, and you lose where you're working, and it gets really obnoxious and repetitive and you kind of flatline. And so I was getting really tired of this perpetual ADHD and whack-a-mole model. And so instead I tried to ask, what do these all have in common? Instead of trying to go downstream and look at the problem of, if I train for push-ups, yeah, I'm going to have good carryover with dips, but how's my carryover to rope climbs, right? They're not necessarily linked. And obviously that gets amplified out if you're looking at something like a buddy carry, right? So you're going to have all these issues where if you're focusing too zoomed in, if you're focusing too much on one of the trees, you can't perform when life throws you a curveball. And so the solution I found that was really helpful was to ask, what are all of these getting after? And I found that I could group all of these together by looking at my strength to weight ratio. And the reason it helped to make it a strength to weight ratio piece is if you can bench 400 pounds, but you're weighing 300 pounds, you're not all that strong once your weight's compared to it, and it keeps you honest, and it prevents you from looking like a refrigerator who then can't move. In the bottom part, I was able to group together when I said my key variable for cardio is my VO2 max. Because almost all tasks you do as a soldier require you to use oxygen, but not all tasks force you to run. Like combatives is super heavy in cardio, but you're not running anywhere. And you need to be able to swim, especially for stuff like the best ranger competition. But again, running isn't necessarily going to translate. So by taking a step back between these two, and really targeting these actions, you have really easy metrics. This is one number. These can be distilled to one number. And for your strength to weight ratio, I use my total. Powerlifting community generally advocates back squat, deadlift, and bench. And while that's helpful, I think for us as a community, biasing it towards a shoulder press can be a little bit more honest, because you have to have good core strength, stabilization, and posture to make that work for you. Additionally, doing it with the front squat requires more core strength. And when you're doing your heavy buddy carries or your ammo carries or your litter carries, the weight's in front of you and you need to stabilize it. And the deadlift I kept as a standard deadlift, because that is a pretty awesome lift for building back strength. And so the advantage of making sure this number is going up is when you got a heavy ruck, it won't break you. If your core is strong enough to support 355 pounds on the bar for a front squat, it's also strong enough to support a ruck. And if you're able to press overhead, 175, 200 pounds with a shoulder press, you can more than handle any of the horizontal pushing you're going to be thrown at you. The VO2 max is really helpful because it creates one number that allows you to integrate all the other cardio work you're doing. So if you want to do biking or you want to do rowing, instead of having these things piecemeal, you can look at your training week and say, hey, my end state is increasing my VO2 max. Now, one of the initial problems you have with this is you're like, okay, bro, that sounds great, but now I've got one number that's on the far end of the spectrum with strength, and I have another number that's at the far end of the spectrum with cardio. And that leads a lot of times to the whole like Kenyan versus powerlifter building argument. And so when it came to designing a training plan, I asked, like, where do these overlap? Like, what activities hit both of these? So that way I can continue to improve physically, and it's not coming at the cost of the other. And the big things that stuck out was mobility. The same tight hips that are going to prevent you from getting your stride turnover when you're running are the same type hits that are going to deny you from squatting well. And the same type shoulders that are going to prevent you from hitting your shoulder press are the same type shoulders that are going to interfere with swimming. And so by hitting mobility, you're able to recover faster and perform better. Another thing that was really focused on by trying to hit both is nutrition. You can pretend to outrun a bad diet, and when you're lifting heavy, you can argue that you're looking thick because you're bulking. But when you're accountable to both of these numbers, what you bring in for lunch matters, because you're not going to have enough fuel to get through the training week if you're not eating right, and you can't justify getting fat in the pursuit of strength if the way you're measuring yourself is a strength-weight ratio. And so mobility and nutrition took on a whole new meaning. And the other thing that really needs to be considered are sleep and hydration. One of the stats that blows my mind is that as soon as you're like 5% dehydrated by body weight, you're 45% decrease in your athletic performance. And the whole 8 ounces of water thing is assuming you weigh like 130 pounds. Because the best rule of thumb I've found for how much water you need is body weight divided by 2. And that's your baseline sitting in office not doing anything crazy that day. If you're working out or running around, you need to replace every pound of water loss with a Nalgene, 32 ounces. So very quickly it becomes obvious that the lifters carrying around a giant milk jug full of water might be onto something. And that was really helpful to make sure that you're able to recover faster. So these two crush recovery. And sleep, the Army seems to reward people for getting on with no sleep. Like if you can get through 5-6 hours, that's somehow seen as a badge of courage. The reality though is that little sleep completely jacks up your hormonal system and you can't recover. And the nice part of having these two numbers immediately available to tell you where you're at is you can see the impact. And so I found just sleeping more led both of those numbers to significantly increase with no change in the training plan. And so I'd offer that by taking a hard look at your performance in these lifts and the ability to do these lifts, like actually getting in and making sure your front squat, you've got like slam ball behind you and you're going to full depth, and making sure your VO2 max is assessed as accurately as possible. For those of you guys that don't have access to a full kit up with a lab where you can hop on a treadmill and they can check respiration, VDOT is an app you can get on your phone, and it takes your most recent run pace time. So say you just did a 2 mile last week for time. You can use that score to get an approximate VO2 max. And while it's not necessarily perfect, it's a hell of a lot better than not having anything to fight off. And as long as you keep that as your constant source of calculations and you keep feeding it through that, any inaccuracies are negated. And so I'd say for anyone who's looking at how do you design, now that you've got that week 1 template, a program that's going to let you have a strong base of fitness that you can then adjust to when you have Ranger School or a selection type event or an APFT coming up. If you can do well building the foundation for most of these, then when you need to be able to work on push-ups, you're coming from a position of strength, quite literally, because strength takes time to build. And when you have a specific competition coming up, if you're doing really well with both of these, then 4 to 6 weeks of fine-tuning the engine for that performance is all you're going to need instead of having to constantly reinvent your entire programming. So that was a really helpful breakdown to organize my training and the guys I work with.